we're going to talk about idioms, sites, tools, and ideas for language learners. We have a very global audience today from all over, from Egypt, Brazil, from Poland, and the UK, and Italy, and the US, and just many, many places. So we're very excited. I got this picture from a great resource that I'll talk to you about today. I'm Shelley Terrell, and every Friday we have a free webinar, so you're welcome to invite friends, and you can also get a certificate of attendance. So just come and join us. So this particular picture, what I like a lot is it came from Flickr, and it's Creative Commons, so you can see with Flickr all you have to do is you just have to attribute who the picture was taken from. You can find it through a Creative Commons license, and this is a great way to get students to start being very interested in visualizing different types of idioms. And idioms are very difficult for students. It's quite a challenge, and there's good reasons to teach idioms. But maybe you can try, and you can see right here what this idiom is. So this idiom is illustrating lost in the system, and it's actually by this Flickr artist who actually he painted this. He paints a bunch of different idioms. And so his is a really great Flickr account to look at because it's very interesting and will definitely spark students' interest. Oops, where did that go? So let's go back to that. Sorry about that. And so why would you think it would be important to actually teach language learners about idioms? Because there's kind of a debate going with that. Well, it's really difficult for students. I learned with my German students when I was teaching in Germany recently that the last 5 years when I was teaching in Germany, and even when I was teaching in Athens, it was really one of the most difficult things for them to grasp were idioms. And there's a very good reason why. One of the reasons why is because they are cultural. They're very culturally specific. And if you're teaching in a region where they're not going to encounter idioms all the time, then that can be very difficult. For example, in Germany, they're going to hear a lot of German around them. But in their different types of situations, they will encounter idioms. The other thing is that, and also by culture means by region. So some different types of idioms that are in the U.S. you may hear in the South U.S., but you may not hear in the North. And the same thing with the different types of Englishes. So you may hear some idioms popular in the U.K., but you're not going to hear the same idioms in the U.S. They're going to be very, very different and mean very different things. So you come to that issue of what kind of idioms do you teach, and which one are you going to teach? Are you going to teach the U.S. one, or are you going to teach the U.K., the British English one? And so that becomes an issue. Another issue is they require context. The students actually have to be surrounded within the context or be aware of the context in order to understand what the idiom is, because it's not a literal translation. So what did I do? Well, I asked the students what kind of idioms they wanted to learn and where they heard idioms. And I was very surprised because my adult students especially found that some of the times that they needed to learn the idioms was because of their workplace. And now that we have global environments and students are exposed to different cultural elements like music, English music. I've traveled to 21 different countries. I guess Brazil would be 22. And English music has been played in every single one of those questions. So, sorry, I'm reading the chat box, and Thomas is saying he has Thai girls yelling, no way, Jose. But yeah, so some of these do catch on, but the students are exposed to them in movies, like Ola was saying in the chat box, and also music and the newspapers, and in radio and in commentary. And so they're surrounded with these idioms and podcasts and things like that, and English materials that they will study, authentic ones where they're more likely to study English because a student is more likely to listen to English music than to really pay attention to the textbook. So it's good for them to understand what these idioms mean, because it's not like they can define them. It's not like they can go to a book and they can look up every word and understand the meaning. They're not going to be able to do that. But also in business situations, if you teach adult students, then you'll be able to see that a lot of your adult students, when they're in meetings with, and they work with a global audience, or with Americans or those from India or from the UK, that they will encounter them in the meeting, or they will encounter them in phone calls, because this is what my students said. And so they would say something like, what does this idiom mean? Because this is one that I always hear. So one of the things I did with my students, I'm going to go over what I did with them, and then we'll talk about other ideas as well, is I actually have a wiki, and I think the wiki is a great tool. It's a free website, and your students can contribute to it, but it's free for educators. So I got an education account, and so you can go, it's the dawenglishwikispaces.com. And if you go to idioms, then you'll be able to see what we did. But the first thing we did was we studied it from a business context. And so I showed him a video, because I thought the video was really good, about common workplace expressions, because they're the ones who came up to me and said, these are the ones that we need to know. And then I gave them some websites and quizzes and things like that. And this was their study to do to prepare for the lesson. But the actual lesson, this was just to introduce them to different types of idioms. The other part was to compare the English idioms to idioms from their country. And that was a lot of fun. So what we did was we talked about, in every language you have idioms. It's culture specific. So what we did was we took literal meanings of idioms. Here's a bunch of them that you may be able to see that are really fantastic. But these are the ones. This was something funny that one of the students bought. And this was idioms that are in German with a literal translation. So the first one my students bought was "Ist mir Wurst." And the literal translation in English is "That's me sausage," which is, you can tell the funniness between it. And my students actually bought this in. And what we did is we not only had a big old laugh and had a lot of how hilarious it was, but the other thing is that we were able to talk about what is the real meaning. And so I asked them, I became the student, and I said, well, what would this helped with my German learning as well, so maybe there is a motive there. But I was able to say, what would this mean? Give me context. And they provided the information, and then we tried to find together as a group, as a class discussion, what would be the best idiom in English to kind of match that. And because they already knew the context and they already knew the meaning from that language, they understood their idiom, it was good to compare and contrast that way. You can do that with any type of language that there is you can get the students to bring it from their own culture. And if you're a teacher of that language, then that gives you a benefit. And then you can begin to equate what would be the English idiom for that. And not only that, but the students start understanding that they can't be a literal translation. So it's a really great activity, I think. There are other really great suggestions that I've used from Janet. And Janet suggests some of the things in her, you can see her SlideShare presentation. But if you go to her blog, which is the civitacquana.blogspot.com, which is the place in Italy she is currently at. But one of the things she suggests is for students to actually do things with idioms. So after you introduce them to the structure, different types of idioms, and the context, there are different things. It's important that they begin to use them. And they have to be able to use them, and they have to be able to use them within a context, because when they produce the idioms, then they'll start getting used to using them. So one of the things I did with my students is I actually had one of them, she was an architecture student. And so what we would do is she would tell me the idioms that she would hear and some that she wanted to use. But one of them was that we would do these role play of phone calls or emails, and then I would have her use one or two of the idioms, and then we would record it, and then she would see if whether or not she used it right. And I always let her, it was the feedback that she kind of did on her own. She told me these are the mistakes I made, and it was very interesting because she would notice that and she would say, oh, I didn't use the idiom right. And so then she got used to using it within a context in a way that that it could help her. She's very excited to be able to learn how to use it as well, and that's the way most of the students are when they get to use idioms correctly. But Janet suggests to use comic creation tools so that students, they can actually create comics, and when they create the comics, they can create the situations and the context to where they would have a conversation with that idiom used. So I think that's a really great idea. They can use word cloud tools like Word or Tuxedo. There's so many of them. And they can pull out, you can show them a bunch of words and you can show them a bunch of phrases and idioms, and they can pull it out of there. They can say, oh, this is an idiom from all those words. Another one is to use video creation sites. They can create videos with Devolver, with a bunch of different sites. And actually at the end of this presentation, I'll share with you a free course we're doing right now where you can learn video creation sites in our free 5-week digital storytelling course. They can create online stories. They can write newspaper headlines with photos. So there's so many different things that they can do, students, to be able to create the situations and context. Now, Janet, if you go to her website, she even has her own free story. That's an incredible one, this love story full of idioms, so that the learners themselves can learn through this kind of nice romance story. So there are tools that she has created herself to help you with this process. There's also some really cool web tools and sites that you can use. I love this article. I've used this with my students, and this one is it's from Reuters, and it's called "Does Thinking Outside the Box Drive You Mad?" So there's some authentic materials out there that you can find that would be really great to use with your students. And this Reuters article is one of them. And what I did was I basically broke all my students into pairs, and I shared with them the headline, the basic meaning of the article, which is basically, it's an article where they did a survey and they found the 10 office annoyances and the top 10 jargon that is used that is very annoying. So I told my students that, and the first thing I had them do was I had them predict the 10 office annoyances. So they had to, and they loved it because the office annoyances they can find really easily. So they were really excited about that because they could guess that, something like grumpy or moody colleagues, slow computers, small talk gossip in the office. They could easily do that. So once they felt that sense of accomplishment, the next thing they did was I actually gave them different idioms because they weren't too familiar with those. And so I cut the idioms into slips, and then in pairs they had to predict the possible meanings of these idioms, and they already knew it was in a business context, so that kind of helped them with that. And the other part was they had to guess the order, so they had to put them in order, like what they thought. And some of them had heard of some, and they were familiar with it, but they weren't sure what it meant. So it helped if you did it in small groups or pairs, because then you would be able to, they would be able to guess more. And then we went and we were able to go ahead and we were able to figure out, what meanings and which groups got it right and have a class discussion. So they really enjoyed that article. There are really cool websites out there. There's rolloffthetongue.tumblr.com. And this is one of the ones I found from Janet from her presentation at IATEFL on idioms. And this one's so fantastic. It's this incredible website and blog with comics, these really funny comics that are expressing the idiom. And what you can do is you can guess the idiom. You can actually click a button and get a hint. You can get a choice of multiple choice of which of the idioms to choose. And then you can get complete information as well as the answer, the context, and all of these things. This is an award-winning site. I believe Tara Benwell might be here, but I think TEFL.net chose them as like one of the winners, the Tifo side of the month, and it's so fantastic. It's just very funny. So maybe let's see, rolls off the tongue. Okay, let's see how many of you can guess what this one would be. Just as a kind of fun thing. Anyone got any clues? What this particular one might be? And this is from today, so if you wanted to, you could cheat, I guess. I can give you a hint. Oh, it's actually available on Friday, but we can get a hint here. Oh, I'm getting that. Let me go ahead and give you. And it says the hint is explaining procreation. And the saying as well, it looks like it's that time that we have another father and son talk. So I think you may be able, yes, very good. So some of you already got it. Yeah, talking about the birds and the bees. So that's a real fun one. English Central has this really cool thing. So English Central, what they do is it's just a great site for language learners, but it takes videos like Lord of the Rings and different types of movie scenarios and things like that that are really famous. And the learners can practice their English with these videos. It's fantastic. It's interactive. But they have this idiom tool. And what you do is you see the video, you hear the video, and what you do is you click the idiom in the player line, you get a description of the idiom, you hear it pronounced, you can practice it, and then usually it'll test what if you pronounce it right. Like it'll say, yes, you're very good at it, or you're very bad at it, or you need to practice more. So it's really fantastic, actually. It's this great interactive tool that learners can use to actually pronounce their idioms as well, and they can see it within the context of the video. So it's really, really a great, fantastic tool. And this is from English Central. And I'll give you at the end the site, so you don't have to worry about it too much if you didn't mark all of these down. It's in one resource that you can easily get access to. Idioms by Kids, this is a great kind of place where they take the literal translations, and over thousands of kids have created drawings for these translations. These are literal translations. So these are all kids' drawings. But the great thing is that you can take the literal one and you can see it. And what you can do is the students can begin guessing, and adults love this because they love to see kids' drawings, of course. And they can see things like Bee and her bonnet, Crimea River. If you go to the beginning one, there's this huge one about dead meat, and it's this poor meat that's yelling, I'm dying, help me, I'm dying. It's really kind of cute the way they do these literal translations. But another good idea is you can actually get younger kids, if you're teaching them idioms, to see this. They can make their own literal translations, and they can upload them to the website. They can act out translations. So you can do something like a idiom charade. So after they learn about all of these, they can go and they can act them out, and then they can guess which ones they are. But even with adults, they have different lesson plans that you can have with adults and stuff. They really encourage things like learning and creating stories with these idioms and learning about the context. They have literal drawings by the kids. You can share your drawings. And they also have explanations of each of the idioms. So here you have Crimea River, but then it tells you at the bottom what it means. So you don't only get the literal translation, but it gives a really great context and examples and things as well. And as Rasha points out, yes, they can do it as a game. And when you make things as a game, then it becomes a lot of fun for the participants. this isn't interactive, and I'm not sure if you understand what an interactive is, but what it means is readwritethink.org has tons of interactive. So the students go online, they can go to readwritethink.org, and they can actually do different types of English things, or science things or math things. So it's really good for CLIL as well. But they do this in general, and what they do is it walks them through a process of where they have to do an activity. So here they actually do one on idioms, and what they have to do is complete the sentence by selecting the correct idiom from the list. And then they show a bunch of these, so they go through a process. They go through actually 7 steps. And then they get a choice. School would be blank without test and homework, so they can use it within context. They have a choice. And then they have to type in the metaphorical meaning of the idiom, and then they have to use it in a sentence. So it's really great because then you can go ahead and you can have the students do this lesson online. It's something you don't have to create. It's kind of an assessment for you, you know? So it's really great for that reason. And yes, all of this stuff is going to be really great. All the links will be provided afterwards in the Pinterest document, so don't worry. Just stick to the end and you'll get all the links in one easy place. Let's see. So then we have idiomaday.blogspot.com. This is a really great website as well. It shows videos so you can hear this in context. And the great thing about this is a lot of times your students, that's where they will hear idioms that they pick up. That they'll actually hear it in music, or they'll hear it in different types of publications. They'll read it and see it. It's from the culture, the English culture. And more than likely, they're going to be surrounded by cultural elements, things that they read, things in the news, things they're exposed to online, that's very popular. So this gives it the context, and they're going to say, oh, you know, I've heard this song by Joe Cocker. Oh, now I understand what he's talking about. It helps me understand the song. But there's other videos as well, like it even gives speeches made by public figures and things like that. So it can show how others use this, like Obama and the Prime Minister, how they use idioms as well in everyday type of speech. And the great thing is it'll explain it to them. And it's a blog, so the students can go and they can ask questions to the blogger at the Idioms a Day, and this blogger will help them along the way. So it's a way for them to get individualized help, and you don't have to be there all the time. One of the greatest resources for phrasal verbs, vocabulary, lexical approach, all of that, and idioms is the Corpus of Contemporary American English. It has 425 million words within the context of all of these publications online. You see Newsweek, the Chicago Tribune, you see Sports Illustrated, you see books, you see in newscasts. They even have transcripts of very famous newscasts, CNN, things like that. And what happens is you search for the idiom or the phrase, or you search for the vocabulary word. I search for dead meat. And these are all the examples it comes up with, thousands and thousands, literally. And it shows you what the context is. Science news, you have analogs, you have the Washington Post, you have Our Story Begins. And then you can see how it's used. You can click on it and learn a lot more about it. But these give a lot of examples on, so students, when they go and they have individual research with an idiom, if you give them a list of idioms, then they can go and they can give individual research, and then they can say one of the examples and pick and choose the one they like best, and then they can present it to the class. And you all can have a discussion of why they like that the best, how they thought it was most interestingly used, and things like that, and try to mimic what they see inside these different publications. And then you have things like the free dictionary, and the free dictionary is going to go ahead and give you random idioms, and it's going to give you examples, and this is from Cambridge. It has over 7,000 different idioms, and a lot of these are going to be British English ones. So if you want to do British English ones versus American ones, which I do a lot with my students when I was in Germany, they were exposed to both. You know, they worked with colleagues in the UK, and they worked with colleagues in the US, and so for them they wanted to learn both, and this was a way for them to explore both types of idioms. And then you have this Flickr group. This is a great Flickr group. You can show any of these examples so you can elicit responses from your students. And you can go out. These are all pictures of different idioms. It's the idioms in English. It's this Flickr group. Now, they're not all Creative Commons, so that is a problem. You can't use them in a blog or anything, but you can use them for personal use and show them on an interactive whiteboard and stuff. Yes, this is Janet's Sunflower. She's part of this group. And so this is a really great resource. But one of the things about this is that your students, you can have them go outside and you can have them create their own pictures. They can take a picture. They can work together in pairs. And they can take their own pictures and kind of set up things so that way they can create their own picture visual for their idiom. And you can see some really cool ones that are done right here. So they can work in groups to do this, and then they can add it to the Idioms in English Flickr group and upload it, and then they'll be very motivated because then they can see this online, and it's useful for other people as well. And then you have your own class come up, and they kind of understand it because they put visuals to this idiom. There's the idiom jungle. The idiom jungle is really great. It has different types of idioms, but the great thing is that it'll give you advice, it'll give you business, a checklist, emotions. It groups it by different kinds. So you can have animal idioms and things like that. It gives you an interactive, it'll give you notes, and it also gives you a printout as well as a video. This by Bob Wilson is really fantastic. It's at autoenglish.org, and there's quizzes as well. So this one's really just good for outside use as well if your students just want to go ahead and unfortunately with some of the idioms, some of the best ways is you have to drill it. So it's great for them to be able to see videos and have an interactive and have a quiz that they can do outside of the classroom to keep practicing those idioms. There's a lot of resources here, and the idea is that there's so many that you don't really have to come up with all of these extra activities for yourself. So if you have a wiki like I do, then you can just go and you can take a search of these, and then you can decide which ones are very good for your teaching and provide a link to these websites and have your students go and do the exploration, and this is their assessment. This is what I do with my students, and they love it. They don't mind that it's not me who has, created these. There's no point in reinventing the wheel, right? And then I have them do authentic kind of things like sharing their own idioms, and we get a laugh and things like that. But it's good to do kind of both. And here is another one, another self-study site of idiom quizzes. And sometimes we just need a bunch of and it does it really well. It does it by level. It does medium, beginners. It does matching quizzes. It does all kinds of quizzes, multiple choice, within context, write it again, and with different phrasal verbs as well, idioms with numbers. It breaks it by subject. But this way, the students themselves can get as much practice as they want. And my students, some of them are very motivated. And I leave this all as very optional ways that they can study some more. But some of them are going to need more idioms than others. They're going to need to know it more, so they tend to do it. And then finally, another one is the idiomconnection.com, which is the 100 most frequently used English idioms. But I found that a lot of the idioms here are actually phrasal verbs, and that's something that you may have to distinguish. But, for me, it's kind of like, apples and oranges. As long as my students are learning, it's not too important that, they call this a phrasal verb or they call this an idiom, although I do tell them, this is more of a phrasal verb and this is an idiom. But in this idiom connection, they connect them together and don't make quite that distinction as much as I would like. So that's something to be looking for. And that's it. That's our 30 minutes. I hope you learned a lot. I'm going to go ahead and share with you where you can find all of these in a very visually pleasing place, which is Pinterest. And if you haven't looked at Pinterest yet, this is one of the best bookmarking tools that I have found. So you can find many, many more links here, and you'll even be able to find this slideshow in about 5 or 10 minutes. And you can even find links to Janet's work, which is incredible, in her free story that she has created, this love story with idioms. So hopefully you learned a lot. And if you have anything to share, you're more than welcome to. I will put the audio for participants, and you're more than welcome to share an idea that you do with your students, or any problems or questions that you have. Thanks, Clive. Yes, that's what it is, Janet. The Isabella and Frederick's idiomatic love story. Okay, so Ola asked, are your webinars on your wiki, American TESOL, or both? The webinars, actually, you can find them at the bit.ly address, which is the this one here. I'll actually give you the real address. You can find the links here, but I have to redo them because these links are a bit, the Live Finder is getting kind of cluttered since we've had over 50 of these presentations. Actually, I was doing something the other day, and I found there was like over 100 presentations that I have, so it's definitely something. But that's the Live Finder, and then you can find, but you can find all of